for our last workshop plenary session, we put together a panel of Rabbanim and experienced Gabbayim to talk about Gabbayis and the relationship to the shul, to the Rav, to the community. To my right, Mr. David Englander, who is the Gabbai at the Young Israel, Kew Garden Hills in New York City. Mr. Jay Lunzer, who is the Gabbai at Congregation Kilas Jeshurun in New York City. Joining us in a few moments is Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum, the Rabbi of the Young Israel of Lawrence Cedarhurst in Lawrence Cedarhurst, New York. And to begin with a few introductory remarks, it is truly a privilege for me to introduce to you all the Executive Vice President of the Orthodox Union. Before coming here, Rabbi Weinrib was the Merid Asra of Congregation Shomrei Emunah in Baltimore, Maryland. This was a shul that under his leadership didn't double, didn't triple. I think it went 4 times the number of members in that shul because the shul was infused with halacha, love, and a true sense of avodas Hashem. And that's something that has permeated the programs, the initiatives, and the efforts of this organization since he assumed the role of Executive Vice President. He's a clinical psychologist, so that may be a very worthy profession with this particular group to talk through some of your frustrations, but he's an unbelievable Manik Yisrael. Rabbi Dr. Tzvi Hirsch-Weinrib.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Krupka. Be a clinical psychologist to work here. The staff often needs therapy. Then the clinical psychologist is necessary to address this group. I guess you have to be crazy to be a Gabbai. In all seriousness, I'd like to reflect for a moment about my personal experience with 2 Gabbayim. One was my father, Olav Hasholem, who was the Gabbai of the Agudas Yisrael in Borough Park, before Borough Park was Borough Park, and before the Agudas Yisrael was the Agudas Yisrael. And I remember as a little boy, his taking me early to shul before Mincha on Shabbos, because among his tasks, which I'm sure no one has to do here, was to skin the herring for Shalashudas. All right? Bought the herrings, and then just before Shabbos, to keep it fresh, had to skin them. So from that time on, no wonder that I thought that Kabbalah is a smelly job. Or a fishy job, one or the other. But seriously, I remember that as a very, very young child, among my earliest memories, and the Mesiras Nefesh that my father had, the tact that he had, the ability he had to remember everyone's name. He didn't have then all the technological aids that we have nowadays. The shul, of course, was much smaller than most of the shuls of the people here. But the Mesiras Nefesh, dedication, was something that he took very seriously and something that I guess is an inspiration to me to this day. The other Gabbai, much more recently, was one of the Gabbayim. I think it's true in many shuls, especially older and larger shuls, that even though there might be a new Gabbai with every new administration, there are a couple of people in the shul that they're the Gabbai. I mean, even if they're elected or not elected, they know all the minhagim and which piyutim you skip on Rosh Hashanah and all that type of thing. One of the people, such a person in Baltimore, was a man who since passed away named Gurney Yaffe, Olav Hasholem, who is, when I think of a Gabbai, I often think of him. And before moving to the section of Baltimore where Shomrei Emunah is, he was very active, and he was a Gabbai too in the so-called Glen Avenue Shul, Sheretz Israel, which is a German shul. Schwab was there, Olav Hasholem, and they had until relatively recently all the Minhagei Frankfurt, etc. So I remember every weekday he would set the Gabbai up to, he'd set the Bal Tfilah up to the Amid, let's say, for Mincha. And Mincha was 3:30, and there's a question, when do you start? So Bernie would tell the Gabbai, okay, not now, now. That was his Yekische heritage, you know. Everything was punktlich. I want to just reflect a moment on the seriousness of our endeavor here today, to kind of put it into a context. The mission of the Orthodox Union is, of course, the synagogues. It's my personal belief, and there are people who disagree with me, that the shuls are the backbone of the Jewish community. The institution of the synagogue has not seen its best days in the past. It's still very, very important, and it is, after the family, it is the single most important institution in Jewish life. And that's true in the United States, and it needs to be truer in Israel. When I was last in Israel, I met with a group of Rabbonim. They call themselves the Rabbonim of Sohar, who are interested in somehow molding the shuls in Eretz Yisrael so that they have some of the strong points of the shuls in the United States. Shuls in Eretz Yisrael typically are a place to daven, maybe a place to learn, but the sense of community that comes along with most of the shuls that you all represent is really lacking in most of the shuls in Eretz Yisrael. It's just one example of how some people see the urgency and the necessity of a vibrant synagogue in all of our communities. And of course, there cannot be a vibrant synagogue without a Gabbai who's sensitive but firm, who's learned, and who helps make people feel comfortable and accepted, but also who can enforce whatever needs to be enforced in the way of decorum and standards and adherence to halacha, etc. So the role of the shul is extremely important, and the OU is proud that we represent so many hundreds of shuls, and hopefully so many hundreds more. You have been given a packet with various materials, and in the packet are various materials speaking about the OU, other programs that we do, the importance of so many things, the votetorah.org, which is extremely important. This booklet is one I'm particularly fond of. It's in all of your packets, doing more for your community, which lists the 10-12 major departments of the Orthodox Union of what we do, and I suggest you take it home, study it, and one way or another, not only become an individual member of the OU, but encourage your shuls, if they're not members of the OU, to consider joining and consider getting involved in a variety of ways. In this yesterday's Parsha, Parshas Bo, there is a classic passage in the Ramban. Remember, many of my Rabbeim, from my Zayda to my Rosh Hashiva, used to talk about the Ramban at the end of Parshas Bo. The Ramban of Parshas Bo, it's worthwhile looking into and studying. And he makes the point there that what the whole religion boils down to, from Petach Hamor to Mezuzah, to all the halachas that we're beginning to learn about, Korban Pesach, Yitzias Mitzrayim, etc., it all boils down to Jewish people realizing that we are creatures of Rigo v'Shalom. He uses the words Briosecho Anachnu. 2 words, that's the whole religion. Everything boils down to Briosecho Anachnu. And then he says as follows. After discussing the various mitzvahs in the Parsha and how they all boil down to Briosecho Anachnu, he writes, V'kavonas romamus hakol betfilos. The whole purpose of raising one's voice in prayer. V'kavonas botei knesios. The whole purpose of shuls. U'zechus tfilas orabim. Zehu sheyihiyeh livnei odom mokom yiskab. So the whole purpose is, shul should be a place for people to get together, v'yodu lo el shebero'om v'himsio, and give thanks to God who created them and brought them into being. They should publicize this, etc. The whole purpose of a shul is that people can get together, v'yodu lo el shebero'om, and thank God who created them. And to the extent, by the way, many Mefarshim on the Ramban wonder, what is this Romamus Hakol Betfilos? What does it mean to raise one's voice in prayer? Prayer is supposed to be done quietly, balachash, but answer is, the straight answer to that question is, the Rambam is talking about Tefillah B'Tzibur. And when he's speaking about Tefillah B'Kol, he's speaking about the Shliach Tzibur. And for the Shliach Tzibur, one of the essentials is Tefillah B'Kol. Look in the Rambam, I give a long shir, a Perek Ches, Melchus Tefillah, where the Rambam stresses the Shliach Tzibur, as opposed to the Yochid, is Mispalel B'Kol. It's Mispalel out loud. So he's talking about the whole Inyan of Tzibur of Beis HaKnesses, and it all boils down to the Yodu Le'el Sheprom, and that's something that each and every one of you facilitates in your own way, bringing about the creation of a place, a Mokom Yizkapsu, a place in the Lord's Rambam where people can get together, the Yodu Le'el, and give thanks to the Ribono Shel Olam for all that we, Baruch Hashem, have to be thankful for. We have here a distinguished panel. Rabbi Teitelbaum has arrived. Bruchim Aboyim, and we have two other distinguished panelists who are Gabboyim. I don't know if I put the Rabbi on one table, the Gabboyim on another table. There's no symbolism in that at all. But the Gabboyim are Mr. Jay Lunzer from Congregation Kehillat Yeshua in New York City, and David Englander from the Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills, an old friend from long, long ago. And Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum, also an old friend from the Young Israel of Lawrence Cedarhurst. As you know, this is being webcast to people literally around the world. And Rabbi Krupke earlier encouraged people to submit questions. Some of these have been submitted already and have been discussed in the various workshops. But I have before me from a man named Alan Schleider, who gives us greetings from Neve Daniel in Eretz Yisrael. I think Neve Daniel is in Gush Etzion, if I'm not mistaken. And he writes, I was a Gabbai at Young Israel of Passaic Clifton, serving Rabbi Chaim Wasserman for close to 15 years prior to my Aliyah. That's Aliyah, not Aliyah. An Aliyah you do after 15 years. An Aliyah, hopefully you get more often. Ashrei shezachiti lekach. Several observations and or questions for your consideration during the panel discussion. Number one, the Rabbi and the Gabbai. Rabbi Wasserman used to impress upon me that this was the signature working partnership in the Beit Knesset, the Rabbi and the Gabbai. I would welcome your panels in on this observation. Think for a moment, and who wants to volunteer to go first? Perhaps begin with Mr. England.
The Gabbai works for the Kehillah. We are elected for the Kehillah, but of course the Rabbi is being leader, and he rules on any halachic issues that come up. But I believe that the Gabbai does work for the Kehillah. We are not only involved, especially in our shul, in aliyahs and kibbudim, but many aspects of running the shul itself.
The role of, or the relationship between a rabbi and a gabbai, I think, is paramount to how well a shul runs on a regular basis. The ideal of how a shul runs on, well, the rabbi might be the head of the studio. It's the gabbai who's the producer of the show on either every day or just on Shabbos. And for the two to work together is extremely important. So there's understanding of how the shul operates, who gets kibbudim, who doesn't get kibbudim. There is I don't know if I can bring up one of the questions that was brought up here. Does the gabbai work for the rabbi or for the synagogue? My answer to that would be that the gabbai works with the rabbi not for the synagogue but for the community. The super works for the synagogue, but it's a building. We work for the community at large. It means a lot more that the rabbi and the gabbai understand who gets kibbudim, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, on a regular basis, whether it's the people that give money to the shul or it's the people that need aliyos, the older members of the shul. that there was one instance where in our shul that there was a ger tzedek that had just gone to mikvah the Shabbos of the week of Parshas Yisro. And I remember going over to Rabbi Lookstein and I asked him, I said, I know you might think this is crazy, but instead, how about giving this person the aliyah for the Aseres HaDibros? And he looked at me and said, you're not crazy at all. It's a great idea. And he got up and he said, in front of everybody, of a ger tzedek, that it's his first aliyah is at becoming a member of the Jewish people, and for the Aseres HaDibros. And it's for the Gabbai and Rabbi to understand each other and work together so that they know that they're on the same pathway of working with the shul and doing for the shul.
Our Avodas HaKodesh unfolds without Kohanim leading Avodah. But so much about the synagogue is meant to mimic and to remind us of what used to be. From the location of the Bima to an Aron HaKodesh by its name. Or at the Amud. But we don't have the Kohanim. We have all of us doing Avodas HaKodesh. We have Gabbai. And the smoothness of operation of davening, the Kriyas HaTorah, the Haftorah, beginning of Musaf, Shabbos, Yom Tov, all of that which takes place, that which involves interaction between, let alone the rabbi and the Gabbayim, but between the Gabbayim and the other Gabbayim, between the Gabbayim and members of the Kehillah, the sense of dignity, the sense of Kedusha, the special nature of the moment. All of that can and should be imparted by the mannerisms of the Gabbai. That certain sound, the lilt in his voice, the expression, the enunciation of words, and the glance, the way he looks at someone as he calls up someone, or as he accepts a thank you or a yishukayach, or gives you a yishukayach after an aliyah. All of this contributes to the atmosphere. And the atmosphere plays huge in inspiration. In how we feel as we daven, how we feel as the avodah of the morning unfolds. And because of that, it's critically important that the Gabbai not only work well with the rabbi and the president and the Kehillah, but that the Gabbayim have a tremendous sense of dignity about their work. That they understand that they're working, as was mentioned, for the sake of the Kehillah and for the sake of the Ribono Shel Olam. That they have a great deal of this pleasantness about them vis-a-vis the Kehillah, and yet at the same time a certain, not severity, but a certain dignity or seriousness about the work that they're doing, work that's so very, very important. That's a little bit of what the spirit in which Gabbayis should take place is all about.
Okay, thank you. Alan Schleider from the Neve Daniel continues with point number 2 concerning Hosafot. Rabbi Wasserman always kept his personal chumash available to his Gabbayim. It was marked with each possible available Hosafa. It was rarely a question as to where it was permissible or preferable because the book was always there. I strongly recommend that every Rav provide his Gabbayim with such a chumash, tweaked with his particular halachic preferences. Very interesting idea. I saw a published pamphlet with marked Tosafos. And I haven't seen this particular sefer. I don't know if you've seen it, but we recommended it here, Sefer HaGabbai, which I imagine also contains this kind of material. By the way, I want to mention this Sefer HaGabbai is published. This is my copy. It's published by the Machon Rabbanei Yeshuvim of Kiryat Arba Hebron. Rav Dovla Yair Shlita, the Rav of Kiryat Arba, has convened the Rabbanim of the various Yeshuvim around Kiryat Arba and Hebron. They meet regularly in various ways, and they have a kind of a kollel attached to that group, where they publish various svarim of very, very high quality, and they're not usually well marketed. In this case, you have information of exactly how to get this particular sefer, but I would recommend the other svarim that this group puts out as well. I don't think it's much to discuss on that, but I thank Mr. Schleider for his recommendation. And finally, Mr. Schleider says as follows, and here he's interested in some dialogue on this matter. The perceived lower prestige of Hakba Galila versus Aliyot. Rabbi Wasserman personally insisted, by the way, he must have had a good relationship with his rabbi, because he keeps quoting him, referring to him. Rabbi Wasserman personally insisted that he receive Galila, particularly on Yom Kippur, because he wanted to teach his Kehillah that Hakba and Galila are no less mechubad, perhaps even more mechubad than the Aliyot. I heard no mention of the preferability of Hakba Galila versus Aliyot. I would be interested in dialogue on this matter. So again, we turn to Mr. Englander for your comments and anecdotes and experience about Hakba and Galila.
Well, our rabbi has mentioned many times that Hakba and Galila is more chashuv than Aliyah. But try to convince the other. It'll never happen. It'll never happen. Some people are very understandable, but for your side, if you want to give a Hakba, it'll never work.
I know that Rabbi Lookstein insists on taking Hakba for his yard sites. I've done the same. I know also that when it comes time for the high Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the kibbudim that are given out, Rabbi Lookstein feels that all kibbudim are equal, and it doesn't matter whether you get a Pesicha, a Hakba, Galila, Aliyah, and it's rotational over years, and they're all equal.
To be specific, the Galila, the Golel, is the person who's doing that great kavod of wrapping the Torah and preparing the Torah for the manner in which it's going to be put away and made ready to be taken out and read again. And because of that, the Golel is considered to be the one of the greater kibbudim. Stories told of a shtibel somewhere in Yerushalayim, where I think they have a minute to call up one of the Alter Rebbes who's long gone. They call him up for, they say Yamod Shamishi, and they wait, and then they read, and then they wait again, as if the bracha is being said. And someone once asked what's going on, they answered, although they call up the Rebbe Zatzal to have an aliyah. And he comes, and and this neshama is there, and he has an aliyah. So the cynic, the Misnagid, said, that's not a big deal, let's see him do Haggadah. But Galila is considered to be a very great and important kibbutz, and that should be understood and appreciated by also.
The question for the web viewers, the question from the audience was to Rabbi Teitelbaum, who emphasized the importance of Galila. In some shuls, they do give Galila to a minor, to a boy less than bar mitzvah. Is that incorrect?
Cotton is allowed to be gold. And if the cotton is deserving, and if the cotton is someone who, in some way, we wish to give a good feeling to, in some way we wish to be machabed, it could be an opportunity, perhaps, God forbid, for a young boy who lost a parent, who otherwise is not ola, but can at least be made to feel that they're actively engaging in a mitzvah chavod, mother or father, it should definitely be an opportunity that seizable.
We have some pre-submitted questions, but I see there's an interest here, and there's some questions from the floor, so let's try. The question was, do most shuls make a mishaberach for the person who does Hakba or Galila?
Our shul does, except not for mincha, of course, but we just say Yam do have Magbiya Bagolel, but morning, Shabbos morning, yes, we do.
Our shul does, and we make a point of using it also for somebody that has to bench gomel, and also for a simcha. If someone wants to make a mishaberach for a grandchild or something like that, we do that. We do that for Hagbat.
Question back there. The comment from the gentleman in the audience was that the Koren Yerushalayim has marked off, has a special edition, special tikkun, which marks off all the permissible hosafot. So that's something that's sure easily available.
Chorev has one too.
Chorev has one too, I'm told. In the back. For his Gentile parent. Question was, how do you handle a ger who wants a kibbutz or leah for his Gentile parent? Gabbai, the rabbi on this one?
I defer to the Rav. That's for sure.
That's a good question.
Yeah, the dynamics. It's obviously an important question. Happens more increasingly lately. And
Certainly, I give credit to the Gabbai for the right answer. That's first thing. But it's certainly not a chiyuv. But does a ger have an obligation to be mechabed of a? Absolutely. And because of the fact that it would be only becoming that we as Jews continue to be mechabed, keep it off a aim, what would it be like, the Gemara says, if a person goes from a state of honoring mother and father as a Gentile, but then as a Jew, being absolved of having to do so? Where the Gemara doesn't discuss it specifically in Kibbut Ovaim, Moshe in the Tshuva does, and applies the idea to the case of Kibbut Ovaim, and says, of course, the ger should be mechabed Ovaim. As such, then, though it's not a chiyuv, it's certainly reason for us to say, well, perhaps an aliyah canon should be given. There are also tshuvas that discuss the recitation of Kaddish for the neshama of a mother or father who was not a Jew. And mishaberach for cholim may be said for a non-Jew. And certainly then the sensitivity on the part of the shul, on the kehila's part, the rov's part, the gabbai's part, should be, if at all possible, that the person receive an aliyah.
So you have your answer. Along those lines, I'd like to share with you a story that happened to me. We have a friend, a Hasidic man, an old man now, a friend of my father-in-law of Shalom's family, who lives in Bnei Brak. And Chavi and I stayed one Shabbos with him. It was a Yontif Shavuos, if I recall, with him. And he said, look out the window. Do you see that old man across the courtyard sitting on his porch in a little rocking chair? And I saw this man with a blanket over his feet and no head covering whatsoever, with a shock of white hair, reading a book. In Bnei Brak, you don't often see people without some type of a head covering. Usually it's furry, but it's at least something. Here was someone with that. So he said to me, there's a story behind this person. He is non-Jew from France. And his story is this. His daughter, obviously was born Gentile, actually religious in some Protestant denomination. And there was a Jewish fellow who was studying in France, and they fell in love, and the Jewish boy, Jewish student, married this young girl. As often happens, the girl was interested in religion, became interested in the Jewish religion, became interested in her own conversion, and brought her husband back to Shmiras Mitzvos. I have such cases in my former synagogue. Brought her husband back to observance. And to observance, and back to Israel, and back to Bnei Brak. So they were living, this Giores and her husband, in Bnei Brak. Then her mother passed away, and her father was becoming elderly and unable to take care of himself. There were several other children, but it was the Jewish child who felt, I had to take care of Papa. So she prevailed upon her husband to bring Papa from France, Papa the Gentile, the devout Protestant, from France to Eretz Yisrael, to Bnei Brak. And there he lived, and he had a very interesting profession. Of course, he was the Shabbos guy in Bnei Brak. He drove around on a special little cart, and on Shabbos, in case of emergencies, etc., etc. Then he began to really miss France because he missed going to church every Sunday. In Bnei Brak, there are not many options open for a Lutheran Frenchman. They have all sorts of diversity and pluralism in Bnei Brak, but it doesn't quite go that far. And the nearest church that you could go to is somewhere else. Tikva, Ramat Gan, somewhere else. By the way, the Belzer Rebbe, the Barala, insisted on living in Tel Aviv and not Yerushalayim, because in Tel Aviv there were no churches. Yerushalayim, of course, there were many. In Tel Aviv there were no churches. When they brought, there were no churches, but there's a church somewhere in one of the towns nearby. So the question was, for a while he was able to drive himself. Then he became more infirm and he couldn't get to church on Sunday himself. So she had to drive him. This was already, she couldn't imagine that. So the Stipler was still alive. And she asked the question of the Stipler. And the Stipler said, drive him to the church, park in front, let him go in himself. If he needs help, help him to the door. Just don't go into the church yourself. But it's covered to go into the church. I told that story to one audience, and they told me in Yiddish, "Se ken nicht sein." But I heard the story from an Eid Riya, an Eid Shmiya, and it certainly is consistent with everything that I know. Let me try to go ahead to some of the questions. There are plenty of questions from the floor. We'll get to you. But to some of the questions that were pre-submitted. One is, should there be a mandatory training program for a Gabbai? It's like a mandatory training program for learning how to swim. Some people say the best way to learn how to swim is come to the river. Mr. Englander, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, when I started 28 years ago, I just started, but the two other Gabbaim in the shul. Best thing is on-the-job training. That's how I learn to do my thing. I think that's important.
I must admit, I had the best teacher. My father was here, was the Gabbai at the Jewish Center, and now he's Gabbai Emeritus. But the fact of the matter is that even when I went over to KJ, I was an apprentice to the Gabbai, and that was my training program. It's important that you don't it's not good to get thrown into the water just to learn how to swim, because one has to learn to know the community. And that's very important. The idea that you want to be a Gabbai already sets you aside from anybody else. And also puts you in a special position on your own that this is the type of thing you want to do for the community. You have to also get to know the community. That can't be done on its own. It's not done just by the first day you walk into a job. You have to get to know the community. It's important that there's a transition period between the former and the current. So you get to know who the players are, and who the people are, and what the needs are.
True, a good, experienced, sensitive, conscientious Gabbai is the best one to train the next Gabbai. Working together and getting the sense and feel for what it should be done and how it's done is the best way for a Gabbai to train.
A case study was submitted. I'd like to share it with you. The Gabbai decides to call it quits after 25 years of faithful service to the shul. However, before he makes his announcement, the rabbi asks him to reconsider because his replacement will not be as qualified. Does the Gabbai have an obligation to the rabbi and to the shul to stay on? Englander, what are your thoughts?
Well, I wouldn't do that to our rabbi. He was an inspiration. He still is an inspiration. and I looked up to Rabbi Fabian Schoenfeld, our Modaster of over 55 years. I mean, he's given me physics to continue for all these years. But I would make sure before I did decide, or the item we are voted in each and every year, to call it quiz, I would make sure that there is a reasonable replacement. And I have two wonderful fellow Gabbais working with me right now.
No one is indispensable, and there should always be some other, and the Gabbai gets to go on vacation sometimes too, and somebody has to be there to take care of things when the Gabbai Rishon, or whatever you want to call it, the head Gabbai isn't there. And that, in a way, is a transition of other people knowing what's going on. You can't have somebody that's been there for 25 years says, look, something, it's time for me to move on. And then the rabbi says, look, we really need you. When a Gabbai feels that it's time to move on, there are reasons for that. Either that he's burnt himself out, which is, after 25 years, is, the fact that he lasts 25 years is miraculous. But there's definitely burnout. There's definitely a time when there are more new members in the shul than the older members, and not knowing everybody is becoming an issue. When you want to spend more time, not worrying about what's going on. And it's therefore having a transition plan in effect. Either the shul should have one for sure, the rabbi should definitely have one, and the Gabbai himself should think about it after any number of years that, something, maybe now it's time, instead of walking up to the rabbi and saying, time for me to go.
Okay, there are other questions? The question was if there's someone coming to the shul, a member or otherwise, who drove to shul. He's not quite fully Shomer Shabbos, but he has an interest in it. Can you give him an aliyah? The cons are that he drove to shul. The pros are that this can be makarev him and make him more comfortable and more eager to become a full member of the shul and fully Shomer Shabbos.
While someone who is not fully Shomer Shabbos may have an aliyah, the first rule has to be, what is the rule of the synagogue? If the synagogue has rules as to who counts for a minyan, who gets an aliyah, who may not get an aliyah, that has to be respected. If the synagogue membership wishes to change that, they have to do that with great care. That kind of a rule has a place, has a tradition, has a history. But certainly if you have people who you can be makarev that way, and the sensibilities of the kohol will not be ruffled by doing so, then by all means give an aliyah. But it depends, b'asher b'sham, really, what kind of a kehillah, the history of the kehillah is, its nature, its sensibilities now, and as the kehillah grows and matures, it might change, and its response to such circumstances can change as well.
Well, I want to mention, before I became a pulpit rabbi, I used to daven in the shtibel in Baltimore. The official name of it is Machzikei Torah, but the Rav was Rabbi Yitzchok Sternhel, Zichron Levracha. Rav Sternhel was a Hasidic Yid, Shreimel, etc., who was a Talmud of the Minchas Elazar. The Minchas Elazar, the Munkat Sharab, was not known as a liberal-leaning rabbi, to put it mildly, especially on certain topics. And Rav Sternhel, too, was in certain matters quite a kanoi. And certain matters, surprisingly not. In our shul, we had several young men whose parents were themselves, in some cases, kollel people, but their parents were not Shomer Shabbos. And Rav Sternhel used to permit giving aliyos to the non-Shomer Shabbos parents of the members of the shul, even when it was apparent that they got to the shul in some way that violated the Shabbos. And when people would critically ask him, people do ask rabbis critical questions, even Choshev Rabbanim from as he was, and they used to ask him, and he would say, in Yiddish, he would say, Jetzt ist schon Shabbos. Right now, he's here. He's in shul. How he got here, the Gemara says, now we just Shomer Shabbos. The Gemara says, the person says, Harei Mekudeshesli, Afilu Rosha Gomer Kol Yomov. So, I'm not Shani Tzadik Gomer. Afilu Rosha Gomer Kol Yomov. It's just Mekudesh, Hashem Mehir, Shuma Belibo. This was his derech in Sark, which was a very interesting one, considering who he was and what his opinions were on other matters. But I wondered if the Gabboim have some interesting background on that type of question to share with us.
I was going to say what you just said is that once a person comes into shul, he's there. I don't know how he got to shul, in what method he got there, but he's in a Orthodox shul, davening in a Orthodox environment. Unless he professes, he's in Orthodox shul. he's in an Orthodox shul. I mean, in fact, there have been occasions where there's been a parent of a member who is a non-Orthodox rabbi who has gotten only in shul because they're there, and you don't differentiate.
Well, Hashem, we haven't had that problem. There have been some individual cases, but we would not do it without knowing what our Modas position is on the specific issue.
Okay. Going back. I think Rabbi Teitelbaum's response was basically a lot of this depends upon the shul, its context, where it is, etc., etc. So the rules cannot be so cut and dry. To cover the general gist of his comment, but I'll leave it to Rabbi Teitelbaum to respond to some of the specifics of the question, the matter aspect.
If he's going to have an aliyah, then whether he is one of the Shiva Kruim or whether he gets maftir may not necessarily be of a significant distinction. The reason to give an aliyah may not necessarily be because it's going to bring the person closer, but that may be a very good reason to give an aliyah. Meaning that there are some situations in which a person, if the shul allows for it, should be made to be brought in, and for some people it'll be very meaningful. And then there are situations where it may not be the case, or it may be that the shul has a sensitivity and the kehillah has a sensitivity that we have to take care of and be defensive for the sake of Shmiras Shabbos. It's a different time and a different place. When I was growing up, there were marches down the streets of Borough Park against stores being open on Shabbos. And if that kind of protest of non-observance of Shabbos would take place today, and that was modern Orthodox synagogues involved in modern Orthodox rebellion of great renown who were leading the marches. If that were to take place today, I think you would expect that it would not be a modern Orthodox Rav if it would be done at all in the United States. We have to adjust, not that the halacha adjusts, but the sensitivity of a kehillah and how best to foster greatness amongst the Jewish people, how to be makar of individuals and how to reach out to a broader community has to be adjusted with sensitivity from time to time, from day to day.
I personally, in my rabbinic experience, very, very much, my position is very similar to Rabbi Teitelbaum's. But the Elon, the great tree that I always depend upon for these kinds of rulings, are the words of the Chazon Ish in the very beginning of Yordeya, I think it's in Medalad, where he says that today most of these rules that Rishonim and Achronim spoke about disqualifying people for all sorts of positions because they weren't Shomer Shabbos or whatever, have fallen by the wayside. Because nowadays, as he writes, the trials and the nisyonos, hachayim, of all of us are so great, and there's the Tino Shenishba factor that people's education is so faulty, etc., that you cannot blame people for being Mechalei Shabbos or whatever, and therefore a lot of halachic criteria fall away. The more challenging question that we would face in my former shul was when you had people who were not fully Jews who were Mechalei Shabbos, but rather people who weren't halachic Jews, but who thought they were for one reason or another. All right, they had a non-Orthodox conversion or whatever the situations were, all sorts of situations. That's a whole different question, a whole different kind of question. The person sometimes is Shomer Shabbos in the sense that he thinks he's Jewish, but he's not. And that raises different questions, and here is where I wonder if our way was to give him Psicha, or some other similar covenant. Kilila, Hagba, I don't know. It's an interesting question. What do you think? No? But certainly to give him an aliyah, obviously, it's not Jewish halachically. Let's move on to some other kind of questions. Gentleman in front. Okay. Right.
That's one of the...
Well, I think it's about time to wrap up here.
The Rav. The Rabbi.
Absolutely.
The Rabbi.
The Gabbai both say the Rabbi says.
They're very good Gabbai. They're excellent Gabbai.
The question, I think the web audience may have missed the whole repartee here. But the question, which is a serious question, is suppose the Gabbai and the Rabbi have a difference of opinion on a non-halachic matter. For example, making an additional mishabera, which have no halachic implications. Gabbai feels one way, the Rabbi another. But both of our Gabboyim, men with vast experience and true Gabboyim, immediately yielded to the Rabbi, and the Rabbi agreed that this was a rabbinic question. It reminds me of the story when you say a non-halachic issue. Right. The story is that Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, when he was married, so he made a deal with his wife. He said to her, look, we're going to have differences of opinion. I'll handle everything which is Mila Dishmaya. Everything, all religious issues, that's up to me. And you'll take care of Mila Da'ara. You'll take care of the kitchen and everything that's more material, mundane matters. They both agreed, and they thought they'd have a wonderful life, right? They argued all of their lives, because whatever came up, he said it was a Mila Dishmaya, and she said it was a Mila. And it's very true. It's very true. What is a halachic issue? I mean, anything in B'Shaberach, it might be a halachic issue of Tircha B'Tzibura, and all sorts of other issues. We have 5 minutes to go, and we do have to, it is a case of Mincha is not now, but now, because the web shuts off at exactly 3:30. But there are some other questions, people who haven't had an opportunity. Yes? Okay. The question was after the gentleman gave compliments to the workshop and the conference, which is excellent, and we agree and accept your gratitude and thank you for coming. But the question is, what about the Sheikh Hayel? What about the women in the shul who often, I don't think there's any question about this, often daven with greater kavanah and in more intense spirituality? and at least some of the men, maybe most of the men. How can man's interested in hearing the responses of our panel to how women can be more directly involved in the davening.
I'm going to refer to the right now. It's a very, very difficult question to answer because we see women coming to shul every morning. Women that are there Friday nights and Shabbos morning that attend shura. More and more it's happening, and there's no role that they can have that women can really have in the day-to-day service when it comes to an Orthodox shul. One way that could possibly be handled is that women can give a Devar Torah on a Shabbos or on a Shabbos afternoon, Shal Shudas, having them more involved that way through teaching. Outside of that, nothing really comes to mind on what role they can play.
I do want to say, obviously, this is an important issue. It's one of the issues of our time. Late Rosh Hashiva of Bnei Yisrael, Rav Weinberg Zatzal, used to tell us, pulpit rabbis, that this is the issue of the next decade or two. The role of women in synagogue life in general, because our women are, Baruch Hashem, better and better educated Jewishly, function in the real world as equals, in the outside world as equals, and yet we're part of an Orthodox union, and we have certain parameters that we can't compromise on. But one thing I think that we can all agree to, women who I've spoken to seriously agree that this is certainly one step that we can take without any controversy, and that is to make sure, for example, that the women's section is clean and comfortable and accessible, and that women don't have to go through all sorts of contortions to get in, and that they can hear and see, consistent with halachic standards, what's happening. That's the very least that we can do to make them more comfortable. And that would apply across the board, no matter how strict or less strict the particular shul is. To, as much as possible, to have the Ezras Nosha be a Mokom Tefillah too, and one that can at least hear and see what else is going on. We have only a moment left, and perhaps Rabbi Teitelbaum wants to comment on this question.
I think that what Rav Weinberg is suggesting is that we have to make it clear that the Tefillah of the Tzibur includes all of the members of the Tzibur. The strength of the davening, the strength in Shamayim of our Tefillahs as they rise to Shamayim is going to be stronger because of the voices of everyone there. And that means we have to really esteem the tefillos of the Neshos Chayil. We have to understand that. We have to act accordingly. We have to show the respect to them and to the Ezras Noshim and to their davening that bespeaks how we really believe that the tefillah of the tzibur means all of us. And it's not just the 10 men or 1,000 men on one side of the mechitza, but it's the entire tzibur that's davening together. The tefillah's ha-tzibur is that of everyone in the room.
I'll give you a question. I think that we're about out of time. I want to close, I must close by really commending each and every one of you for the work that you do, which is true avodas hakodesh, to which you hatzlacha in all of your endeavors, and to thank you very much for coming. And Amir Hashem, we will be responsive to your requests for more conferences of this type in the future.